The president has announced his pick for Attorney General and Ambassador to the United Nations. One served in the administration of George H.W. Bush more than 25 years ago. The other was a Fox News anchor as of just a few years ago. Nicole Killian has more from the White House.
President Trump has made his choice to replace Jeff Sessions as Attorney General.
Bill Barr will be nominated for the United States Attorney General position. I think he will serve with great distinction.
Barr has served in the position before. He was President George H.W. Bush's Attorney General from 1991 to 1993. Despite that, he is still somewhat of an outsider to the Trump administration.
I did not know him until recently when I went through the process of looking at people, and he was my first choice from day one.
Barr is still seen as more of an establishment pick and will likely enjoy the full support of Senate Republicans in the upcoming confirmation process.
Respected by Republicans and respected by Democrats, he will be nominated for the United States Attorney General, and hopefully that process will go very quickly.
President Trump also announced he is nominating State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert to be the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
Somebody that we know very well who's done a great job at as working with Mike Pompeo and others over at the State Department.
The former Fox News anchor will replace Nikki Haley, who resigned in October. Nicole Killian, CBS News, the White House.
Well, if approved by the Senate, Barr would oversee the Mueller investigation, a fact obviously not lost on Senate Democrats who are vowing not to approve him unless he commits to protecting the Mueller probe. For more, I want to bring in Jesse Weber, an attorney. So, Jesse, last year, Barr actually wrote this op-ed. In it, he actually defended the president's decision to fire James Comey, then FBI director. Does that give you a sense of how he might handle the Mueller probe?
It could and it could not. We have the same conversation whenever we do a Supreme Court nomination. You can't take someone's statements that they make about any subject and have it as a way to predict what they'll do in the future. I will say this is a very interesting pick in light of the tragic event that happened this week with the passing of former President Bush, and you can think maybe that's a tribute to him in some way. The interesting part about it is we have had an uproar over Matthew Whitaker and whether or not his appointment was constitutional. Here, saying I'm going to replace him with a permanent pick, William Barr, is a way to silence that conversation. And I think the only way to see what he does is when he's actually put in.
Mueller's team is expected to release documents today regarding Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, and also his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, as well. What are you looking for in these documents?
What a week. What a week it's been. So it's not about Manafort and Cohen, really, is it? Manafort, he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, basically, and the fact that he's just been accused of lying to investigators, it's not looking so good for him. Cohen's hoping for a strong plea deal, probably trying to get the same thing that Michael Flynn got. But he's not going to get the same thing that Michael Flynn got because, remember, Flynn cooperated at the very beginning. Cohen kind of cooperated more towards later on. The question is, what information do they have about ongoing investigations? I think when we get the reports, when we get the memos, a lot of it's going to be redacted. So it's trying to understand what is it about moving forward. What I am looking for more specifically, I'm very curious to see their information about the Trump Tower meeting. And when you think that Manafort has provided false information to investigators, if I was a betting man, I would say it would be about that meeting. And I'm curious to see Cohen, who is such a close advisor to the president during this time frame, what information he has. Because if you're the president and nothing has been suggested so far that he broke any kind of law, I want that to be very clear. The question is, it keeps coming forward, what is collusion? What is conspiracy? Nothing has been proven yet, especially when we talked about last week about this $50 million penthouse for President Putin. There's nothing about bribery yet. It's all about his knowledge. So the question is, if you take President Trump and his inner circle and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you have people who are providing information that can be verified, because let's not forget, Cohen and Manafort, they were both convicted and pled guilty to crimes of deception. You can't take their word for it. You have to back it up with other testimony, with other eyewitness accounts and other evidence. So if you back it up and you can create a smaller circle, what I'm also looking for in the next few weeks to see the response from the White House, from President Trump and his legal team, because that's the other thing that Mueller's doing. It's not just about what happened in the past. It's about what's happening right now. And I think people are understanding that he's building a case about the behavior and the actions and the statements and the tweets, all from the president and his legal team. So we're looking at it from two different levels.
Interesting you mentioned those tweets. I was curious, earlier in the week he was critical of Michael Cohen for talking, and then he ended up tweeting out praising his former advisor Roger Stone for, and this is, I'm quoting here, having the guts not to cooperate. Could this be viewed as obstruction of justice? I
think it's going to show a lot more than I think it's going to take a lot more than that to show obstruction of justice. What it does say is it's a PR move, trying to get ahead of it before the information comes forward. What we always wondered was the behavior that he showed towards Manafort before his first trial, praising him, saying, I feel terrible what goes on, because it's giving the indication, could you look out for a pardon later on? Maybe that's the same thing that he's saying about Roger Stone. But let's not forget, these people can still be charged under state crimes, which there's nothing the president can do in that realm. However, I think he's inadvertently saying, if you take care of me, I'll do my best to try to take care of you.
When Mueller came forward this week, his team said that Michael Flynn, former National Security Advisor, won't face any jail time. They made a huge public splash about that. What do you think the tactic was there?
I think the tactic was he provided some valuable information about a lot of ongoing investigations, and he cooperated at the very beginning, which says to any other people that are involved, if you have information and you come forward, you might get the same treatment as Michael Flynn. Now, just because that's a recommendation doesn't mean he's actually going to be sentenced and not receive prison time. The question is, that recommendation from Mueller's team is a huge thing that will definitely be considered, and we'll have to see which way it goes.
You told me earlier that you thought this was a big week for Mueller, but there was also a setback.
Yes, and it was with Manafort. Because when you are building a case, and there is nothing like building a case like it is for Robert Mueller, it's a very difficult job. And I know people say, well, when's the report coming out? Any investigation takes time, let alone when you are looking into President Trump and his administration about possible collusion in the 2016 presidential campaign. So when you are building this, each building block is important. And then all of a sudden, Manafort comes forward and says, well, this information that we were basing a lot of our case on might not be true. It's a setback. And you can tell by how they're angry. They're angry. Mueller's team is angry. They said we're going to press forward with charges, and we're waiting to see the report later on today about what that's about. So it's a setback.
All right. We're eagerly waiting to see what happens. Jesse Weber, thank you very much for joining us, Jesse.
Thank you.